Alright guys, I know there's some of you that have been waiting for it, and it's finally time. Let's take this Savage 24S-E apart and see how everything works. I'm rising up to the challenge, making a video on my disassembly of this. And hopefully within the next day or two, I am going to go show it to my friends who dared me to do it. I want you guys to come along. Hopefully we'll all learn something. So let's go over to the bench and get into the meat and potatoes of this. Alright, so I'm not gonna go out and make a detailed list of all the tools that I'm gonna need for this thing. Hopefully you guys will be able to follow along and kind of gather what you're gonna need for this. It is a little bit more complicated than taking apart something like a Glock, which I could do with nothing more than a 90-degree hook pick. I did make a couple of slave pins out of a piece of, I want to say 1/4-inch wooden dowel, maybe not quite that large. I did have to shave some of the circumference down to make them fit in the smaller holes, but anyway, keep that in mind. You will need slave pins that are just slightly under the diameter of 2 of these pins, I believe, these 2 right here. So one of the first things I'm going to do actually is go ahead and take the stock off, which we're going to need a Phillips head for, at least on this particular one. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my largest Phillips head. If you want to know what kind of screwdrivers I use, go watch my video about hollow ground bits. So we'll take that off. And I like to put these screws back into the same holes that they came out of, just in case one of the screws is different. These are probably the same, but you never know. Now, to actually take the stock off of this one, it's a flathead screw, but it's way down in there. So I'm using a T-handle with an extension on it. And I'm just going to gently go around in there until I find the slot. And it can be tricky sometimes because, I mean, you can get a light and shine it down in there, but it's still really hard to see. Okay, so at the very least it'll help you figure out which way to line your bit up. Now, whether or not you get it in the slot after that, there we go. And I'm putting downward pressure on while I turn this. That way I know that that bit's not going to slip out of the notch, and I'm going to have to line it up all over again. Putting it in is a little bit easier, and you'll see that when we get to that point in the video. Okay, I'm just going to leave that stuff together right there. So now we've got this. All I'm going to do is pull this off. And be careful when you're pulling these off, especially on some of the cheaper ones, because this is a very thin piece of wood right here, and you will just break it right off. Okay. Alright, now that we've got that, we can open the action and separate the receiver from the barrels. We'll set those aside for now. Let's go ahead and start taking the forend apart. Now, taking the forend apart on one of these is generally as simple as removing a couple of screws, though you might need a pick and in some cases possibly a punch. But I'm going to take this screw out first from the bottom side. Like that, and then we can remove this screw on the top side. And then if you want to take this further down, you can. there is a pin here that holds this in place, and then there's another pin that holds the spring that puts tension on this in place. If you do take them apart, just remember how they are configured. I recommend that you take a photograph of not only the orientation of this, but also the orientation of the spring. That way you know how to put it back together, even if for some reason you forget, you've got a photograph of it. Not all of us have a photographic memory. And since this is so simple, I'm just going to go ahead and put this back together real quick, and we're not going to worry about that. We'll get into the meats and potatoes of things here in just a second. Okay. On this particular model, we do have a steel front sight, which is simply screwed down, and I'm just going to take my smallest bit and unscrew that. And it doesn't hurt to do this if your gun's been sitting like mine has, because there's a lot of junk in these screws. Okay. Alright, so the other end of the barrel, the chamber in here, this rear sight is dovetailed into an attached piece of metal here, and we're not going to worry about taking that out. But generally, if you need to replace these, it's as simple as a dovetail. What I would recommend doing at this point actually is taking off this underside stuff first. So we'll flip that over and hopefully not lose focus. Good. Okay. And then what we want to do is grab a punch. We'll drive this pin out first. And it may sound like I'm hitting those kind of hard, but I'm really not. So once you get that front pin out, we'll go ahead and pull the ejector out, which we need to clean up. And then I'm going to take a hook pick. Actually, before that, let me grab a straight pick. I'm going to push this down. Actually, no, that's not going to work. Alright, so there's a little thing in here that we need to bring out. This piece right here. Set that aside. And then we'll drive the smaller pin. Now we can pull this out, and this lever, remember the orientation that it goes in, just like that. And now we can push the spring out. just like that. Okay. Alright, now let's flip it back over. So we've got the shotgun ejector out. Now let's take the rifle ejector out. And this one's just as simple as a little tiny screw. So we will grab our screwdriver here. We'll push it in just a little bit. And it's a very small screw, very short. So do not lose the screw. Let me just pull that out. And see if I can't get that spring out. Alright, so what I'm going to do different with this video that I don't normally do is I'm going to work in segments like we did with the Forend. I showed you how to disassemble it and then I reassembled it for you. We're going to do the same thing with the barrels. I'm going to go ahead and put the ejector systems back in place. So the spring for my rifle ejector did not come out, so it's still in there. I'm going to go ahead and put the actual ejector back in place, just like that. I'm going to squeeze that in, and then carefully thread my screw back into place. And if you want to, you can Loctite this. Okay, just like that. I don't have it too tight because it is a very tiny bit and it would be easy to mess it up. Let's flip it over. Alright, first thing we want to do, take our spring, put it in there, push it all the way back. Next, remember I showed you the orientation of this. We're going to put that in, make sure that it can catch that spring. And we're lining everything up. And I think on this particular one, what I normally needed to do was to hold this with a pair of needle nose and get it started. So that's what I'm going to do. Just like this. Okay, now the pin's started. Now you got one of two choices on here. You can either do this with a punch, or you can do it with a set of I usually do it with a C-clamp. Look at something real quick here. Alright, so there. And I'll line the holes up with a punch, just so I know that it's going exactly where I want it to. And then I'll just tap on it. Alright, good. We got it captured. Stuff's falling off of my bench. Okay. Good. Next then, we'll put our little detent there. And that'll go in front of that, and then behind that we'll put this. Alright, this pin's easier. There we go. And last but not least, of course, we're going to put the front sight back on, because this thing wouldn't be much good without a front sight, would it? And I would recommend using some blue Loctite on this screw. Alright, so now that we're finished with those pieces, let's move on to the bread and butter, because I know this is the one that everyone wants to know about. So at first glance it looks like there's 4 pins here. There's actually only 3. This one on the top, at least on this particular model, is for the takedown lever. And if you notice too, these pins have been fit so they're only supposed to come out one way, and we're going to drive those out from this side. So let's go back over to the vise and get this thing clamped in. We're going to take the internals out, and this is where you'll need your slave pins. We'll need slave pins for both of these, and then once we get that out, we can go about removing the firing pin, or firing pins plural. So let's get over to the vise and we'll get started on this. One of the things that surprised me about this firearm, especially given how old it is that the pins were really not that hard to punch out. And things aren't not just going to fall apart, but I'm going to go ahead and get these pins started out. I'm going to start down here with the trigger pin. I'm going to make sure my vise is locked down. I don't want it to be moving around while I'm trying to work. There, okay. So yeah, this bottom pin is the trigger pin, the top pin is the hammer pin. Obviously this is the takedown lever, and this is a retainer pin for the locking block. There, see? Already starting to come out. And I can just pull it from the other side. And you might hear something moving around in there a little bit. There is some spring leads that will very easily slip off if they're not retained by a pin. But we'll fix those when we take it apart and get everything lined up and put it back together. You can still go ahead and put your slave pins in. This one might be a little bit difficult to do if those spring leads have slipped off. Actually, see, look, the hammer just, or the trigger just fell right out. So I'm not going to worry about that for the time being. Let's just go ahead and get the other pins out. I'll show you how to use the slave pins when we get the trigger housing out of the frame. I am going to go ahead and slave pin this one because it's easier to deal with. Alright. Next, the retainer pin here. And now that that is gone out, what we can do is just wiggle our takedown lever right out of there. There we go. Okay. So if this is your first time doing this, a lot like when I did through my first time, you probably got a bunch of parts just laying here in a pile right now. So we've got the receiver stripped down apart from the firing pins. Those are really simple. There's just two tiny screws here on the right hand side of the receiver. The upper one is the rim fire for the 22 Magnum. That is contained by a spring and a firing pin. So you'll have the screw, the spring, and the firing pin for that. And then the bottom one for the shotgun is just a firing pin. There's no spring. It free floats back and forth. So I'm not going to mess around with taking those out. It's very easy to put those back together. If you want to see a more detailed video on how to replace a firing pin of this type, watch my other video where I was doing the firing pin for that break open shotgun. I think that was also a Savage or a Stevens. Anyway, we're going to set that aside for now. This is the main thing that we're going to focus on. This is what had everybody cautioning me so much against taking this firearm apart. It's actually really simple. So let me go ahead and put these things back together for you. First of all, we have our trigger housing, okay? And this is going to be towards the back of the firearm. Trigger. And before we actually put the trigger in, let me show you that spring that I was talking about. This is the spring that likes to slip off because of the tension and the way it is. Oh, let me move that up. This is the spring that I was talking about that it likes to slip off. It actually nestles into the trigger just like that, but there's spring tension on it like this. So whenever you pull that pin out, unless you're driving it out with your slave pin, which I did not do because I'm using wooden slave pins, but if you've got metal slave pins, then just drive out your pin with your slave pin. And the best case scenario for that is if you're using like brass rod stock to make your slave pins out of. Anyway, so this sits up like this, and this is probably the trickiest part about this entire assembly. We'll set that down in there, and the main thing that we want to do is make sure that the upper legs like that are sticking out that way, and make sure that this is hooked into that spot on the trigger. So we want to install that like this, and it can be a little bit tricky because this also needs to go underneath there, and once you start fiddling around with it, you'll figure out why this is so difficult. It takes me sometimes 3 or 4 times just to get these things together when I'm doing them. So I'm going to use a punch and line my holes up just like that. Okay, so now we've got that together. If I want to at this point, now that it's lined up with the punch, I can install my slave pin. Yeah, you really need about 3 hands to do one of these effectively, but we've got the slave pin in. This one's just a tiny bit short, but it's not a big deal. It's holding everything okay, and as long as when I'm messing around with it, I just cover those 2 bits, it's not going to slip anywhere. So hopefully you guys can see the way that it is set up. And we'll focus on getting the hammer stuff in next. So what I like to do before I put the actual hammer in is put the hammer spring in, and that goes in there just like this. So you can go ahead and push these spring legs back because they're going to be going back that way anyway, and just set it in there just like that, and don't worry, it should hold itself. Next we'll take the hammer and seat those legs on either side, just like that. And this is a lot easier to deal with, and we can just go ahead and put our slave pin in just like that. So you can see how these two cross in the front here, just like that. Okay, next, this spring right here goes on this little nib there, just like that, and that is what holds this, like that. Okay, so that will be the front of the firearm. This slot on the takedown lever will slide right into there, just like that. And that's basically how all these pieces fit together. So the next step that we want to do is return everything to its position inside here, and things can get a little bit tricky. So let me see if I can't do this on the bench right here in front of you. So we're going to hold things just like that. I'm going to very carefully insert this, and I'm going to fold this up. Now you can put this in through the front, but I have found it a lot easier just to slide it up with everything else. You'll encounter a bit of spring pressure, but that's normal. It will have to be angled forward slightly. And just make sure that your hammer's lined up with the notch, otherwise you'll be just wasting time all day long. Okay, now when we're about that far, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger up in here to hold that lock so it doesn't spring out, because it will try to come out. Okay, just like that. And our next step is going to be lining that lock up, and then we want to put that pin in here on the other side. So just make sure that you've got your hole lined up. There. And we don't have to seat it all the way, but now we know that it's going to be secure. Both of our slave pins are still in place. So now before we go any further, let's go ahead and put our takedown lever back in place. And you can see quite clearly where that notch is at. We just slide that in. It should go right down. Okay. And you can see how that functions. Now the next part is the tricky part. We're going to have to return these two pins to where they need to be without disturbing any of the internal workings here. The one thing that we mainly need to be concerned about is that trigger spring that I was showing you earlier, that's got all the fancy stuff on it. And the hammer spring's not going to be, or the hammer pin is not going to be hard. The trigger pin will be a little bit more difficult. The good thing is we have a hole back here that we can shine some light into and look in to make sure that our pin is properly lined up with the spring. And on occasion, if it hasn't jumped too far, you can even bring that spring back to where it needs to be. But we're going to try to avoid getting to that point. So hammer pin, really easy. I'm just going to go ahead and use that to push the slave pin out and tap that into place. Now, what I am going to do here is actually take a punch that is the size of this hole. So let me make sure I don't have one that'll fill it a little bit more perfectly. That one. And I'm going to very carefully line things up here. Actually, that's too big. So let's go one smaller. Now, apart from that spring leg on this side, I've got everything lined up to where it needs to be. All I'd really have to do is get a pick and bring that spring leg over. And this would probably be better to set up in the vise to do this one, so let's do that. So I've got my punch coming in from the other side. I've lined up my spring legs with a straight pick. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to insert it. And I'm holding tension on both sides because I do not want things to slip apart. And if it feels like they're trying to slip, I'm going to push things back together. Just like that. This pin should go most of the way in without any resistance. Now that we're in, and I know for a fact, given the distance, that it is through the first leg of the spring and all the way through the trigger, I'm going to turn it, and I'm actually going to look down in there and see where I need to go. Let me grab my light. And you guys won't be able to see this. Well, actually, let me see if I can get this angled up a little bit better so that you can look in there. It's kind of hard to tell, but you can sort of see where everything lines up. So I can see that I need to pull that spring leg on this side back. There we go. Now I can see that those spring legs are lined up on both sides. I'm going to go ahead and tap this in. And then, before we take it out of the vise, we can verify the function. Make sure that your hammer cocks. Make sure that the trigger will release it. Make sure it doesn't have any push off. But everything is working good in there. So I'm going to finish tapping these pins in, and then we're going to get back in here and put the firearm back together. Alright, so now that we've got everything back together, I've done a little bit of filing on this piece right here because it was peened out and looked like somebody had been having trouble with it. Let's go ahead and actually put the stock back on this. And what I'm actually going to do is take my stock bolt out, line up the bit with the hole, and slide it up in there. Because I don't want to lose the alignment. There. I'm going to set it down nice and firm on my knee like that. And then line that up. And get it started. And don't tighten this down too tight, especially if you got cracks like this one does. I need to go through and fix those, but for now, that's going to be okay. So I ended up taking off a tiny bit of material here just to make sure that that edge would smooth, and I think that may have been what the problem was. So we put it back together, and we just need to make sure that this goes up underneath that ledge in there, just like that. And then last but not least, make sure that this is out. Make sure it's not down like that. Make sure it's all the way back. Hook it in there just like that. Alright guys, so that is the Savage model 24S-E, and I was actually kind of surprised at how easy it was to work on this thing, given all of the feedback that I had received from, you know, friends and fellow gunsmiths in this community. But it was a learning experience for sure. I think working on something like this will help me better understand how some of the older 50s and 60s Savage and Stevens firearms work. And it's definitely one of those firearms that I think I am incredibly lucky to have found. I'm still not certain whether or not I will keep it, but I got it for an incredibly good deal, and it's actually kind of enjoyable to work on. It has its moments, of course. If you sat there fiddling with the springs for 2 or 3 hours like I did the first time I ever took this apart, but I did that so I could share it with you guys so you would know exactly what you're doing. I kind of went into this blind. None of the schematics that I found matched this gun exactly, so I was kind of working on slightly bad information, if you could say, but that didn't stop me, and I take pride in being able to do that, take a firearm apart. You know, I might have something to compare it to, but it may not be the same, so I'm really fortunate that I can do that. And if you guys have any questions about this firearm, let me know down in the comments box below. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Click the like button if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I've got a lot more awesome videos coming, and I do have some plans for things other than the gunsmithing tutorials like we did today. I'm going to be doing basic 101 stuff like gun safety. What is it like to be a first-time gun buyer? I wasn't always the way that I am today. I was not always as passionate about firearms as I am. And if you want to know how things develop for me, you know, subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned. I've got a lot of stuff coming. Once again, thank you so much for watching, guys. My name is Justin, and I'll see you in the next video.